So a couple of weeks ago, Daniel was the first one here for the evening service, and he asked me if I had a plan for tonight for what I was going to talk about, and I told him at that point I hadn't even given it a thought. I was kind of focused at that point on the New Year service that we just had, and hadn't really thought about it too much. And he had a suggestion. I thought it was a really good idea. Since we chant the Heart Sutra, that's kind of a main part of the service every evening, and since emptiness is a word that appears repeatedly in that, it's an important concept and potentially confusing idea. What that word is actually referring to, he thought it might be useful for everybody to kind of explore that idea a little bit, and I thought that was a good idea. It made sense, and this might be a little long, but I'm hoping it won't be. But it's important, so that's okay. Now, before I get too far into it, to be really clear, this is not the definitive anything about this idea, what emptiness means. I'm not sure that's even possible. If it is, I'm not the person to do it, and certainly not in 15 or 20 minutes, hopefully, of talking about it one night. That's not going to get the job done. I'll get back to the Heart Sutra in just a minute, but I actually want to start with the word, right? The critical word, emptiness, right? That's the most common English word that's used almost all the time to translate the Sanskrit word Sunyata. Early on in the Buddhist tradition, this wasn't an important term. Initially, it was only used as kind of a part of the idea of dukkha, of suffering. Life is associated with dissatisfaction, unsatisfactoriness. One reason for that dukkha, that dissatisfaction, the tradition said, is that the body is shunya, it's empty. And by that actually meant empty of cleanliness, because all the dirty things that our bodies are associated with. So at this point, early on in tradition, this actually is a fairly minor term. But the word shunya can also mean hollow or void or zero. And that then became the basis for a bigger idea, for a term that had a larger meaning. And that started with someone I've talked about before, Nagarjuna, right? This philosopher about 1900 years ago. Talked about him a little bit before. Very important Indian Buddhist philosopher and teacher, sometimes called the second Buddha, right? Very, very influential. Basically what Nagarjuna did was he took an older idea from the Buddha and he sort of extended it and expanded it and made it into something that's a huge critical idea in the Mahayana tradition in Buddhism. So let me back up and review where the idea came from. So the Buddha taught that the existence of living beings, is associated with what he called three marks, the three marks of existence, right? Dukkha, already talked about that one. Dissatisfactoriness, right? Or suffering. Suffering is the usual word that's used. Anitya, impermanence, right? Everything's impermanent, nothing lasts forever. Anatman, no self. That there's no permanent, unchanging kind of core or central part of a being, no soul. That's one way it's interpreted sometimes. So what Nagarjuna did was he took that last idea, he took that idea of Anatman, and he blew it up. He blew it up to something huge. He kind of took it to its logical conclusion. It's not just that a living being has no fundamental unchanging nature. What he said was rather nothing has a fundamental unchanging nature, right? If everything is related to everything else, if everything is dependent on previous causes and outside conditions, then nothing stands alone. Nothing is autonomous, nothing is as it seems, nothing is what we commonly take it to be. Everything, every object, every being, every idea is an illusion, not in the sense that it's not real, but in the sense that its nature is not what it appears to be. Right? So to quote from there's an author, a translator, Red Pine, Bill Porter, upon close analysis, nothing exists by itself. Any given entity can only be defined in terms of other entities in time, space, and mind. And these can only be defined in terms of other entities, and so on ad infinitum. Thus, nothing exists by itself, and nothing exists as itself. There is no such thing as a self. Now, so that's the idea, right? So then the question becomes, how do we talk about it? How do we talk about that idea? How do we discuss it among ourselves? I guess we could avoid some confusion by just using the original word. Use the word Nagarjuna used. We could use Sunyata, right? That's the Sanskrit term. We could use that word, but then that creates a whole new kind of confusion because it's not a word that people are familiar with. So that implies we need to translate the word. So then what do we translate it as? How could we capture that idea in one word? So what's ended up happening, for good or bad, I'd say bad, is that we end up with this word emptiness. Again, that's the most common English word that's used to stand for this idea. I'm not completely certain who used it first. In his book on the Heart Sutra, Kazuaki Tanahashi says that the oldest version of the Heart Sutra in English was created by Max Müller, who was German, but he was a professor at Oxford, so, in English. That was 1884. But he also implies that actually the famous Japanese philosopher D.T. Suzuki, who kind of brought the idea of Zen to the West, to America, his version of the Heart Sutra, he wrote a book, it was published in 1935, and it had a version of the Heart Sutra in it. And Tanahashi says that version, Suzuki's version, is kind of the one that is the basis for all the other English versions of the text. They both use the word emptiness, so it's hard to tell whose use of the word emptiness is really the one that's responsible for it. So regardless of who's to blame, I'm not sure they did us a favor with this word. The problem is, in English, obviously the word empty has some negative, bleak connotations, right? Something being empty implies that it has no content, therefore maybe it has no value, right? It has no content, so therefore it has no worth. Emptiness sounds like nothingness, right? Can you tell those two words apart? Nothingness sounds like nothing exists, therefore nothing matters. But that's a kind of nihilism that's not what the word shunyata means at all. So that's way off the mark. I'm going to come back to this issue at the end. What word should we be using? And actually talk about an alternative word, another translation. But I have to admit, we're probably stuck with emptiness. There's only 8,000 versions of this text in English that all use the word emptiness. I think we're going to have to live with it, try to do a better job of understanding it. So to quote again from Red Pine, emptiness does not mean nothingness. It simply means the absence of the erroneous distinction that divides one entity from another, one being from another, one thought from another. Emptiness is not nothingness, it's everything at once. It is a double negative that stops short of establishing a positive. Emptiness means indivisibility. So, with that said, let's back up to the Heart Sutra now. And what I hope you'll see when we look at it in a little bit more detail is this notion of shunyata is what most, if not all, of the text is about in one way or another. There's the three obvious lines, but not just those three obvious lines. So from the version that we chant every week, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form is emptiness, emptiness form. Form here, the word that's translated as form, in the original text in Sanskrit, it's the word rupa. Rupa, sometimes that refers kind of just narrowly to the physical form of a person, the body. In other words, it's the body. Sometimes it's translated as body of a living being. But actually it means more broadly than that. It means all material stuff. It means all matter. It means everything that everything is made of. Everything that all physical things are made of is rupa, because it all has substance. It means substance, right? the stuff that things are made of. So one way to interpret those lines is that form refers to everything that's part of our ordinary experience, as our experience of the world of stuff, of substance. Emptiness refers to some higher ultimate reality, and the two are fundamentally the same. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So they're fundamentally the same, and therefore ultimate reality can only be grasped through our everyday experiences. Right? In our state of ignorance, neither everyday reality or ultimate reality are really what they think they are. So the closest we can get to ultimate reality is experiencing it through our everyday reality, through our everyday experiences. In his version of the Heart Sutra, as he translated it, Red Pine Bill Porter does those lines this way. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not separate from form. Form is not separate from emptiness. Whatever is form is emptiness. Whatever is emptiness is form. So that even kind of more strongly reinforces that sort of mutuality of the two things. Now, actually, if you look at the text, the three verses that come after those lines really continue that theme. All dharmas are empty. Well, what the heck's a dharma? That's confusing, because what's a dharma? Because dharma is another one of these words that is used in different ways. It's used in different ways in different contexts. One thing dharma means is a teaching of the Buddha, or all of the teachings kind of collectively of the Buddha. But it also means all phenomenon, all the phenomena from which the world is built, all the phenomena that we experience, and that the world we live in is sort of constructed from. None of these things have their own inherent nature, since all of them are constructed from other things and arose from conditions that required conditions from things outside of themselves. If just think about your own physical body, right? Your physical body arose from conditions requiring the existence of the universe, the formation of the earth, the evolution of human beings, a lineage of ancestors leading up to your parents, all the air and water and food that you've ever consumed, and so on, right? Without all of those things, there's no you. So you are all of those things. You're connected to all of those things. The same is true for every sensory experience you've ever had, for every thought that's ever crossed your mind, every impulse to act you've ever felt, every state of consciousness you've ever experienced. You can't separate any of those things from kind of everything else in the world. Even the Four Noble Truths, one of the most basic teachings of Buddhism, is sort of inextricable from this idea of Sunyata, right? The text says, no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cease from suffering, no path to lead out of suffering. That's the Four Noble Truths. That's empty too, right? Because those things and those ideas can't be separated from all other things and all other ideas. Even the seemingly ultimate line in the text, no knowledge, no attainment, no realization, or another way that it's translated sometimes, no understanding. In his book about the Heart Sutra, Thich Nhat Hanh says that understanding is made up of non-understanding elements. So even it doesn't exist on its own. So therefore, understanding is empty, because understanding cannot stand alone. Understanding cannot be distinguished from all other things. So therefore, even understanding is characterized by emptiness. Thich Nhat Hanh also points out that we can't comprehend the implications of emptiness without thinking about what something is empty of. If you have a cup and you drink the water out of it until there's no water left in it, you could say that it's empty, right? And if you're talking about water, it's empty of water, but it's full of air, right? So it's full of something. It's just not it's empty of one thing, but it's not empty of everything. So again, he says, in order to describe something as empty, you have to specify what it is that you're saying that it's empty of. So his take on it is that all of these things that are listed in the Heart Sutra, our bodies, our mental processes, our existential fates, these things are all empty of separateness. That's the thing that they're empty of. They're empty of separateness, of an independent existence. They do not exist, they coexist, because they exist in a way that's connected to everything else that exists, just like your liver can't live without the rest of your body, right? It coexists with everything else. He also uses an interesting metaphor about the ocean, that emptiness is the water, form is the wave. You can't have the wave without the water. The wave is really just a temporary process that's happening in the water. It's not really something that's separate from the water. When the shape of the wave is lost, when the wave gets to the beach and the shape of the wave is lost, nothing's actually happened or changed or been lost. The water's still there, right? The water is still water. And when the conditions of wind and tide are right, then it'll develop into another wave, and there'll be another wave, right? So nothing is really lost, even though the apparent form of it isn't there anymore, temporarily at least. So before we leave this idea, I want to revisit this issue of how to translate the word Sunyata. Is there a better option? Is there a better option than the word emptiness? A little while ago, I mentioned Kaz Tanahashi, whose book on the Heart Sutra came out in 2014. This is obviously, the Heart Sutra is that much, right? That's that much of the book. That much of the book is the Heart Sutra. The rest of it's talking about, the Heart Sutra. But he gives a different translation that was created by himself and Joan Halifax, who's the founder and abbot of Upaya Zen Center that's out in New Mexico. I actually want to read this to you. Again, it's the Heart Sutra. It's really short, right? So I want to read it to you. I want you to listen for, I think you'll immediately recognize some similarities, but also some really clear differences, not just from what we chant every week, but from basically any other English version of it that you look at. So this is their take on it. The Sutra on the Heart of Realizing Wisdom Beyond Wisdom. Avalokiteshvara, who helps all to awaken, moves in the deep course of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom, sees that all 5 streams of body, heart, and mind are without boundary, and frees all from anguish. O Shariputra, who listens to the teachings of the Buddha, form is not separate from boundlessness. Boundlessness is not separate from form. Form is boundlessness. Boundlessness is form. Feelings, perceptions, inclinations, and discernment are also like this. O Shariputra, boundlessness is the nature of all things. It neither arises nor perishes, neither stains nor purifies, neither increases nor decreases. Boundlessness is not limited by form, nor by feelings, perceptions, inclinations, or discernment. It is free of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, free of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and any object of mind, free of sensory realms, including the realm of the mind. It is free of ignorance and the end of ignorance. Boundlessness is free of old age and death, and free of the end of old age and death. It is free of suffering, arising, cessation, and path, and free of wisdom and attainment. Being free of attainment, those who help all to awaken abide in the realization of wisdom beyond wisdom, and live with an unhindered mind. Without hindrance, the mind has no fear. Free from confusion, those who lead all to liberation embody profound serenity. All those in the past, present, and future who realized wisdom beyond wisdom manifest unsurpassable and thorough awakening. Know that realizing wisdom beyond wisdom is no other than this wondrous mantra, luminous, unequaled, and supreme. It relieves all suffering. It is genuine, not illusory. So set forth this mantra of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom. Set forth this mantra that says, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisvaha. So, you heard that, right? Boundlessness, not emptiness, boundlessness. What were they thinking? What is the deal with this boundlessness? Well, in his commentary on the translation, Tanahashi admits that that the words shunya and shunyata in Sanskrit mean a lot of things that all sound a lot like emptiness, right? Hollowness, loneliness, non-existence, zero-ness. Actually, in Hindi, in modern Hindi, sunya, not shunya, sunya is the number zero. That's the word for the number zero, sunya. So Tanahashi writes, in zero-ness, all things are connected, nothing is absolute, nothing is separate, nobody is alone. Even Buddhist doctrines are seen as zero-ness, not containing fixed truth. Experience of this teaching is seen as awakening, as freedom, no other than prajna paramita. But then he goes on to note that the Chinese words that are used in ancient translations, the early translations from Sanskrit into China, while they mean all those things that I'm just talking about, hollowness and loneliness and all that, they also communicate the idea of openness, spaciousness, broadness, enormousness, even the sky, right? So to include that sense, he and Halifax came up with this word boundlessness rather than using emptiness. Thich Nhat Hanh actually mentioned something similar. He doesn't go quite so far as to rebelliously use this non-standard translation, but he talks about a similar idea. He points out that in the West, a circle suggests nothingness since there's nothing inside it, right? It's empty on the inside. But in India, a circle means wholeness since it includes everything in itself. Everything's wrapped up in the circle. He says that emptiness, since it doesn't have its own nature, is actually full of everything and is the ground of everything, which immediately reminds me of the way theologian Paul Tillich defined God as the ground of all being. Right? So that sounds like a really similar idea. I don't know how you feel about this. Maybe this is just a silly semantic debate that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean anything. But using boundlessness, thinking about this as boundlessness changes the way I kind of feel about the text. I mean, when I chant the text, I do it the way my teacher taught me to do it, because I love and respect my teacher and value the lineage and the tradition that he gave to me. But inside my head, I'm thinking something different, right? If you are without intrinsic nature, if there's nothing about you that's permanent or unchanging, if everything about you is made up of non-you elements, is the end result of an infinite progression of conditions that connect you to everything, everywhere, projecting infinitely back into the past as well as forward into the future, right? The 3 times, the 10 directions, then you really and truly are boundless, right? There's no hard edge between you and all other things. There's no point where you stop and other things begin. There's no clear distinction that can be made between you and anything else that's not just convention and culture, right? So you're connected to all time and space. So in a sense, you are all time and space. So you are boundless. And if you have no limits, then you're absolutely free. Sangbol Hashipshio, may you, I, and all beings manifest in light.